Hey, welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and good morning to all of our viewers and our listeners out there. It is Tuesday. We are back here again. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company and managing partner of Saywitz Properties, and we are here talking more real estate. I want to welcome everybody back here again in a post-birthday show for me, so happy birthday to me. My birthday was on Sunday, 29 again, and fully recovered and ready to talk some real estate. Before we get going, I do want to do a shout-out to the Yukon Huskies men's basketball team and the South Carolina women's basketball team. Some exciting stuff over the last couple of weeks, so congratulations to both of those schools and their fan base. And then secondly, I want to just bring up, I know everybody's talking about it with the solar eclipse yesterday. It was a lifetime event. It was a couple of decade event. And different people experienced it in different ways. I told everybody here in the studio I would share my experience. And because here in Southern California we didn't really get a good shot of the eclipse, I decided to go into the janitor closet in my office, turn the lights out, put my sunglasses on, and sit there for 22 minutes by myself in solitude and experience it. It was quite a good experience for me and gave me some downtime. I know others experienced it, and so it's exciting stuff. But with all of that said, we're going to talk a little real estate this morning. I want to welcome our guest, Sebastion Sadeghi, who is Managing Director of Lab Holding Court, based here in Orange County, local real estate owner, manager, operator, acquirer extraordinaire. Sebastion, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Barry. Glad to be here.
So I want to talk a little bit about your history and how you got into real estate, and then we'll talk a little bit about the company as well. But so you went to school at Berkeley in a somewhat, I'll call, liberal environment, not really known for producing real estate magnates of sorts, but yet you got a degree in real estate and economics, as did I, a little further south. What interested you in real estate in the first place, and why go that route?
Yeah, well, I always like to say I got into real estate the old-fashioned way. My parents are developers.
There you go.
So both my parents are technically developers now. They were actually fashion designers by trade. So growing up, we had a very interesting upbringing. It was very design-oriented. Did a ton of traveling. We visited, we lost count at some point, I think something like 100 countries growing up. So there was never really any pressure to get into real estate. When I started getting a little bit older, I always became interested just in tall buildings, kind of flying around the world and seeing these tall buildings go up in Asia. It was really intriguing to me. And the further I kind of dove into that interest, the quicker I realized, well, I'm more interested in owning the building than just simply designing it, because, by the way, if you own it, you also get to design it too. Right. So long story short, from, 7, 8, 9 years old, I knew I wanted to go into real estate, and, ending up at Berkeley was a little bit of a zigzaggy path. I thought I wanted to go to Wharton. Wharton did not realize I wanted to go there, so ended up at Berkeley, and you're right. It was a very interesting experience from a cultural standpoint. It was close to home, but growing up in Orange County, kind of a red county within a state of blue, it was a really kind of enlightening experience for me. And there is no real estate degree at Berkeley, so I got there. I wanted to do business, and at some point I got a little frustrated because they have this great real estate MBA program. And I went to the architectural school and I made the complaint that, hey, you have such a good, real estate program at the business school, and you have such a renowned architectural program, and these buildings are a couple hundred feet away. Why isn't there a program that blends those two? And I got a little bit lucky in that there was a professor there at the time who actually was a real estate developer by trade. He was later in his career and had decided to kind of give back and join academia. And he, took pity on me, I guess. And long story short, ended up putting together a one-of-a-kind curriculum just for myself, and ended up with what I believe is a one-of-one real estate development degree from Berkeley, and then combined that with economics, and ended up being a tremendous experience.
Yeah, neat stuff. I went to UCLA, and they don't have a real estate program either. You have to get a degree in economics, and Sort of the same program. I was going to go to Berkeley, but then when I went to visit, they had like a nude parade of protest of some sort. And my father looked at me and said, "You're not going." But so you get the degree in real estate, and then out of school, you start to work for some very large, prominent real estate companies to sort of get different experience in different facets of the business, I'm guessing.
Yep, that's exactly right. So I guess rewinding the clock back a little bit, my freshman year of high school was 2009. And I was 14. I was just kind of becoming lucid, I guess, if you want to call it. And the world was kind of collapsing. And one of my initial friends in high school who I became good friends with, his dad was a hedge fund manager. And kind of connecting the dots, I was like, well, what the heck is going on? It seems like something's going on. And that really, instilled kind of an interest in finance for me. So I, kind of dual tracked this interest in real estate and finance. And coming out of Berkeley, when I was in Berkeley, I would kind of switch off each summer between finance and real estate. So my junior year internship, which is kind of your big internship, was at JP Morgan, working in their TMT investment banking division, which happened to be across the street from Salesforce Tower. And I would look at Salesforce Tower going up every night at midnight. I'm cranking on some, paperwork, for lack of a better term, and just thinking I really want to be on the other side of the street. I want to be on the real estate side. So coming out of school, that's what I did. I worked for a firm in San Francisco that was a really interesting firm. It was led by a gentleman who had come from New York and had very much a New York way of doing business, but very small, lean shop. Got a tremendous amount of experience there, and then ultimately had the opportunity to join a firm down here in Newport Beach, PIMCO. I like to say I didn't make it too far, so knew I wanted to do real estate, grew up in Laguna, born in Newport, ended up back in Newport, and was there for several years and had an incredible experience. And what I'm really humbled to have had the opportunity to work there, and I always say I seriously think it was one of the best seats on the West Coast for a junior person. It was just drinking from a fire hose nonstop for several years. So,
yeah. And so then you migrate to Lab Holding?
Exactly.
And so Lab Holding was already in existence, and then you got involved in family-run business, right? I guess talk about that for.
Sure. So made the hop to the family business about 2 years ago. Lab Holding was founded by my parents, as I mentioned. They're both fashion designers by trade, and Lab stands for Little American Business. And the impetus for them leaving the action sports arena at the time and getting into real estate was that they saw this cultural shift of, post World War II America was all about consumption, and it was Holiday Inns and fast food, and it was about standardization and rolling out these chains. And what they began to see was, my dad in particular had worked at a public company, was that these public companies are in a little bit of a situation here in that they were running a big surf brand at the time, and we're selling a brand, but in order to sell a brand and grow that top line revenue, we need to compromise and go into these chain stores. And there's a little bit of a issue there, as you can imagine. So long story short, they had this idea of coming up with what ended up being the Lab Anti-Mall, which was their first project. And they basically created a kind of cultural center, so to speak, for these younger generation folks. So people in their teens, 20s, their target demographic when they were in the action sports industry, and they just created an entire center catered to them. So it wasn't a Macy's and a Nordstrom's and a bunch of inline retail. It was 100% action sports oriented, targeted to that, late teens to 20s demographic. And that project now is 30 years strong. Some of the tenants from day one, 30 years ago, are still there. And then from there, kind of grew, and mostly retail oriented. But as I joined a couple of years ago, we've expanded to 40-something properties, almost exclusively Orange County. We have one development in Riverside County and one in San Diego County coming up.
And they're all geared towards some sort of an alternative theme, right? That none of them are what I would call your traditional retail, where I buy a strip center or I have a mini mall or something like that. It really has, each of them, from my understanding, has its own sort of draw, if you will.
That's right.
Is that kind of the...
Yeah, I think most of our firm and really the DNA of our firm is design oriented, and it's culturally oriented. So we don't even really think about it as, we're in the real estate business. We think about it, we're in the space business. And our job is to create and manage really intriguing spaces. And our spaces, our goal is to create a real community gathering space that has some durability over time. So, as I mentioned, the lab was principled off of this cultural shift into this younger demographic coming of age. And then the camp was one of the first green centers in the country. And this was back in the early 2000s when yoga was not a thing. I think we had one of the first yoga studios in Southern California at that time. And all of our projects carry that sort of theme.
It's more of a destination, right? I mean, it's a hangout, it's a destination. It's
exactly.
not like I go to the store, I buy a thing, and then I leave.
Our theme is not product oriented, it's community gathering oriented.
Yeah.
So what is the impetus for the community to gather changes, but the theme, if you want to call it that, is that we are trying to create community spaces.
And no different, I think, than in the concept of an Irvine company trying to create an experience at a Fashion Island or in the Spectrum Center or other outdoor malls, creating an experience where you would bring, if it's a family-oriented demographic, then I would bring my family and I could spend the afternoon and go on a Ferris wheel and do some shopping and get some ice cream or whatever the case is. Yours is the same concept, but for a different demographic and age group.
That's right. And it's right to an extent, I'll say. I guess the caveat there is our goal is, if you want to put it as such, community gathering space, and we don't want to have a target demographic. Our target demographic is anyone who lives close to our project. And our way of thinking is, if we can attract the people closest to our project, irrespective of age, income, they will have a successful experience. They're going to be there long term, and they will tell their friends, and that kind of concentric ring will grow wider and wider over time. So that's how we like to approach everything. And if we have, again, the person across the street, we're going to have the person 10 miles down the road. If we have the person 10 miles down the road, that's great for 6 months, but they may not be here 10 years, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so when you have these projects, is it, I'm looking at a project and then I look at the real estate and then I come up with the concept, or is it that I have a concept in my mind, now I got to go find a piece of real estate, or is it both?
It's a little bit of both. We're artists and we like to make art. So I think we always look first and foremost as to what is currently in the neighborhood. And we are farmers, but we don't like to plant seeds. We like to cultivate them, if you can follow that analogy. So Packing House would be a great example. We saw a lot of cultural history there. Anaheim was one of the oldest cities in Orange County, of a really deep history, but a little bit in the shadow of Disneyland. I think a lot of people think Disneyland first and foremost. You have the Ducks, you have the Angels. There's a lot going on in Anaheim. And we saw this amazing history there. We tried to bring that back through the Packing House, through a lot of the distilleries and breweries that we bought there, because there is an interesting history along those lines in Anaheim. So I think for the most part, we're really looking at the community and trying to see what the community would enjoy. We call it doing a little bit of cultural discovery and cultural archaeology up front. But we do at times have concepts that we're just looking for the right building for. I think that's probably, if you wanted to put a rough math on it, a third of the time, and 2/3 of the time we're really looking at communities that we think have a really interesting history and try to bring that out.
And you were telling me before we got on the air that in some instances you actually own or manage some of the tenant space within these projects to, number one, get more integrated, have more control, and then it's another profit center as well. Do you go out to the third-party tenants and select them? Do they come to you? How does it go once you have a project that's in the making?
So we start off with, again, finding what is the cultural direction of this project, what's existing in the community, what can we bring out here, and what's going to attract the local resident. That's the demographic we're going for, irrespective of age. And from there, we kind of build a tenant roster of sorts and what the wish list is. And we'll try to find, the right tenants to fit that wish list, and we'll try to design the project to meet those wish list needs. As an example, if we think a brewery would do great here, we're going to design a project with, a great space for a brewery with the right amount of patio space, so on and so forth. At this point, we're really fortunate to have a large stable of successful tenants that we've done business with for decades. Again, LAB stands for Little American Business. We are really hands-on. So we have helped people design their logos. We give them full access to our internal team. We'll work with them to get plans through the city. Sometimes these are first-time operators. They have a real passion for something. Their product is good, and we're helping them fill in the business side of things. I was on a call last week, describing what percentage rent is, how a triple net lease even works to a tenant.
That's a whole nother show. That might be next week.
Yeah, exactly. So we take a real hands-on approach, and finding them is a mix of going to our existing tenant base. We have a real trust with our tenants. They've seen our projects. We don't sell anything. We manage everything. We eat our own cooking, and we'll bring them along, and we'll try to find some third-party tenants, new operators. Some of them may not have a location before, so we'll work with them to try to cultivate that. We love it when someone in the community wants to start their own business. We're happy to give them that chance. And a piece of it too is, at times we're looking for, the perfect coffee shop or the perfect cheese shop happened one time, and we couldn't find it, so we just did it ourselves. Yeah. And that's kind of how we ended up with our F&B division, which has kind of grown organically over time.
And it seems like too, if you give somebody the opportunity and they do a startup and they do well, then you have another project down the road. You could go back to your existing stable of tenants, say, hey, anybody want to expand?
Exactly. And we have a pretty diverse mix of assets. We have everything from bar tenants to retail tenants to fiberglass manufacturers, and we have spaces as small as 200 square feet available on a month-to-month basis to spaces that are 12,000 square foot on a 10-year basis. So what we love to see is, we're, again, mostly Orange County focused. We love to see tenants grow with us. So if you start off in the 500 square foot space on a 1 or 2 year deal, and you shift into the 2,000 square foot space, and then you're on your second location, we love to see that.
Yeah. And for those out there who don't know what percentage rent is, the short answer is the better you do as the tenant, the better your landlord does, because you pay more rent based on your volume of business, not based on a fixed rental amount.
Exactly.
So good in retail, and doesn't really work in other sectors, but does apply. So in terms of, I guess, looking forward for the company in terms of growth and expansion, are you looking at opportunities outside of Orange County or Southern California, or really the goal is I want to be able to drive there and feel it and touch it and stay here?
I think what we have done well, we look at things very holistically. So in order for us to be successful at what we do, we have to have a certain setup. And I, coming from a more financial background, really take pride in our capital structure. We have no financial partners. We're 100% family owned. We're long-term fixed rate borrowers. And that seems great from a financial perspective, but it really impacts the day-to-day operations of the real estate. So if we had a different capital structure, we would not be afforded the opportunity to take a risk on a first-time operator, right? Or we couldn't have, we like doing 5-year deals to keep our product mix fresh, to give people the opportunity to grow. I don't know what's going to happen next week, let alone 5-10 years from now. So to sign a 10-year lease, particularly in this world, seems a little bit outdated. So, but you need to have the right capital structure to do that. So we're prideful in that, and I think, having said that, we're really focused on long-term, modest growth. We are in the business of 10-year 10s, as I like to say, not 3-year 20s or 5-year 15s. So generally, when we look at projects, our first couple of years is truly stabilization. We live with these assets for decades, not years. So that carries over to how our outlook on the business is, and we would like to continue growing at a modest pace for long periods of time.
So if the right deal comes along, you do it, but the idea of, hey, we're on expansion, I need to buy, not there, and not needed. Exactly.
And we also look at, kind of 2 fundamental ways to skin the cat in real estate. You can either be very good at one product and do it everywhere. I'll pick on Greystar as an example. They're very good at multifamily. They do multifamily across the country. You can also be very good at one location and do multiple things. I'll pick on Rick Caruso. He does hospitality, he does retail, he does multifamily, but he does it in Southern California for the most part. And we like to take that latter approach. So we are primarily Southern California orientated. We're almost exclusively Orange County, but we do a little bit of everything. I think we're best known for our retail centers because they're front facing, but we also have a fair bit of land that's oriented towards residential. We have some industrial. We have a fair amount of what I like to call flex, as I mentioned. And it's, a little bit of industrial meets retail meets creative office. So our focus, again, long-term modest growth, hopefully staying within the Southern California area, but always expanding our product offerings, our diversity of assets.
Got it. So let's talk interest rates a little bit, because it keeps coming up, and I think the CPI numbers come out tomorrow, and doesn't look good, and then everybody's expectations that rates will come down, and then the whole pitch to me by everybody I talk to, which says, hey, you should buy this property because you could refinance it in a year and it'll be much cheaper, I think goes out the window or gets pushed off far enough that I can't see the answer. I'm curious your thoughts as to what that does, not necessarily in your world, because you're looking at a stabilized asset and then you're looking at it long term. So while interest rate comes into play, it's not going to make or break at the end of the day. But it to me, it does impact not only buyer and seller's expectations, but then it also impacts just making a deal pencil at the end of the day.
Yeah, great question. Certainly top of mind for most of the industry. As a firm, we've been a little bit, this has been a bit of a head scratcher for us. And honestly, we kind of like higher interest rates because we're generally lower leverage, we're fixed rate, and our MO has always been, if this deal doesn't work at a 4.5% interest rate versus a 6.5% interest rate, is it really that good of a deal in the first place? And again, we're investing over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and we're going to be successful if in 10 years from now people are still coming to our properties, not if interest rates are, not if we got 3 cuts this year versus 2 cuts versus 4 cuts. So, and on the flip side, cash in the bank earns 5% now.
Right, that's the dilemma, which is why would I go buy something at a 4 cap, get 6.5% interest when I can just leave it in the bank and do nothing?
Yeah.
For now.
For now. The other thing, though, is, well, I guess a couple of things on that. The first part is, I always hear, and I have a lot of friends that are younger in the business. They're, in syndications. They're trying to grow their book as they should. And they're talking about, oh, well, financing is so expensive. But I've always contended, well, okay, financing is 6.5% now. Cash in the bank's earning 5. My opportunity cost is 150 basis points. You wind the clock back a couple years, financing was 4.5, 4, pick your number. I was earning 0 in the bank. Opportunity cost was 400, 450 basis points. So is financing really that much more expensive? Now, real estate prices certainly have an offset where your levered IRR is going to account for that increase, which I think is what you're speaking to, and trying to make it count. But it's also a little bit theoretical in a sense, because at least the people that I talk to, I don't know any real estate guy who's like, okay, well, I'm focused in the apartment business and I'm just going to buy treasuries now. I'm going to sell everything and buy treasuries. It's a complete, I think it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. It's relevant in the sense that return expectations are impacted, but I guess we're a little bit more sanguine and, defensive on that kind of point of view, that it's as impactful. For us in Orange County, a little bit less impactful.
And really two schools of thought, not to dig too deep into the economic side of it, but you're an economics guy. I look at it the same way, which is short term. If I'm not rushed to buy a property, it really, most of them don't make any sense today. But everybody else who's come in here on the show says, look, if you're going to hold it for 30 years, eventually it will make sense. And so as long as you can make some sense of it today, then the deal will get better over time, which is true. The issue is it makes it difficult to buy something that has, no return or almost 0 return, and you're buying somebody else's bag of whatever they've got and trying to make it your own. And therein lies the question, which is the head scratcher, as you say, which is, if interest rates come down a little bit, is it going to do anything to cap rates? Or are cap rates going to continue, which they have, continue to hold and be inverted relative to interest rates?
Yeah, I think, again, I guess a couple things, because we spent a lot of time thinking about this. And in relation to positive versus negative leverage, well, okay, again, I think it's a little bit simplistic in that you're looking at unlevered, right? Cap rates unlevered versus your cost of financing, but people still borrow money to buy deals. So, and they do that because it's accretive to your levered IRR, right? Because your cap rate doesn't take into account whatever value add upside you have, doesn't take into account whatever rent growth you may be projecting or not. So, it absolutely mutes the market in terms of transaction volume. We've seen that, absolutely. On the institutional side, it's much more pronounced. We operate within Orange County, generally sub-institutional, so I think we have a little bit of defensibility just in that, these owners are lower leverage and longer term thinking as we are, so there's less orientation towards being transactionally focused. So more muted. What do I think happens to cap rates? If that was the question, I think we're kind of flat would be my guess. The two things that we're really focused on is not necessarily the cost of financing, but the availability of financing. I think cost of financing is a secondary concern to the availability of financing. And with some of these regional bank issues that have been hit and miss over the last 12 to 18 months, that's more concerning to us than are we borrowing at 5, 6, or 7? Are we borrowing at all is more concerning.
And the relationship side of the banking piece of it, becomes more pronounced. Not that it always wasn't there, but it is almost a necessity in today's world that you need to have a relationship with me. I'm not going to just make you a loan out the gate.
Yeah,
Right?
and the last thing on interest rates, and again, I'm not to sound overly bullish, I guess, at the risk of sounding overly bullish, I would rather have a stubbornly decent economy and high interest rates than a stubbornly bad one with low interest rates. Because at the end of the day, when you're investing in real estate, you're investing in the fundamental operational components of the business, right? So if rents are good, expenses are modest, you're managing well, and NOI is growing over time, you're generally going to do well. Now, if you can do all that, plus you can add on accretive leverage, that's just gravy.
And then you'd be spending a bunch of time at the beach because it'd all be good.
Exactly. My tan would be much better.
Yes, you and me both.
So, yeah.
So that brings me to my next question, which is expenses, right? So you mentioned, hey, if expenses are modest, and they are not, we still have inflation. We still have runaway utility costs, trash costs, operating costs, new $20 an hour here in Southern California. Well, I guess in California as a whole at minimum wage. What does that do for not only your business in the spaces where you operate, but also, what are you hearing from your tenants?
Sure.
How are they dealing with it?
So I guess I'll break it into kind of a three-part answer. We have our operating businesses, we have our real estate assets, and we have our tenants. So kind of taking them in order, our operating businesses is a mixed bag. Our bars doing very good. Higher margin, our labor is stickier, they're generally better paid. It's similar to being a barber. If you're a good bartender, you build a clientele, you stay with it. And restaurant business a little bit different. And the kind of thing that doesn't get talked about as much is that when minimum wage goes up 5 or 10%, your labor costs don't go up 5 or 10%. They go up much more. Because when, as you mentioned, the $20 franchise minimum wage now, whatever the terminology is, that keeps everyone's head on a swivel, and then there's going to be more frictional kind of employment costs. So your restaurant employees are going to be looking for other opportunities. Yeah. And when they switch, it's not simply that, they were making, I'm making it up $15 an hour, I need to go pay the next guy 17. It's no, I need to pay overtime in the meantime. And then I need to go find the next guy, which is going to take my manager's time and our corporate time.
Then I have to train him, and then he's probably going to leave again.
Exactly. And then I have to pay him 17 an hour. So your labor costs don't go up by whatever the minimum wage increase is. It's significantly more. And that's been a little bit of a creep for us, and we see that with other operators as well. Again, less pronounced on the bar side, generally less turnover. Restaurant side, a little bit heavier. Food costs obviously are through the roof, and there's only so much food costs that you can pass through to your consumer. So we see that. Another funny thing that always gets lost is the weather matters. So when it rains in January and February, your breweries in particular,
good, right?
it hits your sales. So irrespective of consumer pocketbooks, people just don't want to go outside. They don't want to spend as much money. They don't want to go hang out and buy that cup of coffee. That's been one that also gets lost. That's probably been more impactful to us, quite honestly, than some of these other economic forces. Just generally bad weather the last 2 years. And then, not to belabor the point, but also dry January. Dry January is real. I don't think we had any one of our bar businesses or any one of our tenants in the just general alcohol serving arena that had increased sales. I think there've been a consistent decrease in January. Dry January, it's real.
Yeah, combine that with bad weather, and you got a double whammy.
So there's a lot of operational things aside from minimum wage, but kind of moving forward to our assets, we're generally triple net leases. You still get hit with expenses as a triple net landlord, right? Your CAMs, you can't just increase them to infinity. So that flows through to your bottom line in the sense that your renewals or your new leases are going to be at lower base rates because the CAMs went up. And CAMs, we used to be well insulated because we don't sell. We got the Prop 13 coupon, as I always tell our
your
tenants.
taxes are lower.
Exactly.
It used to be your insurance is lower. That's not the case
But that's
anymore.
all changed. So now insurance goes up 20% a year. Janitorial and security, a lot of our retail is oriented towards F&B, and we have heavy janitorial and security costs, and those are significant increases, again, because of the minimum wage, because of the ability of finding labor. So that's passed through. And then our tenants, it's been a little bit of a combination of both. I think the biggest thing on the tenant side for us is actually not labor costs, it's cost of build out. And cost of build out is including timing of build out. So I would tell you that a restaurant right now, there's a little bit of a dichotomy. An operating restaurant is generally doing pretty well. To get a restaurant open is tougher than ever.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it is. Our first gen restaurant spaces are the toughest to get filled, but once they're filled, those restaurants do great. But
right. I mean, the infrastructure, the getting through the city.
Exactly. Health department.
Yeah.
That has been a real struggle.
I bet. And then you're back to this, as you mentioned, the cost of construction is literally at least double what it used to be in yesterday's world. So now the operator, if they're paying for it, struggles with it. If you're paying for part of it, you're chipping in more, and it's just more and more.
Yeah, yeah, that's really been the breaking point. If I was going to give you our team's number one concern, it's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
And that includes cost of construction. Our typical tenant, and we have this conversation probably once a week, is, I had 2 or 3 locations. We barely survived through COVID. We're just getting our footing under us. We've stabilized 2 to 3 years later. We're ready to open up our 3rd or 4th location.
And now you're hitting me with increased camps.
Exactly. So
Mr. Big Bad Landlord.
we're signing a lease, and oh my gosh, it took me, 150, 200 grand to open up my last location in 2018-19. Now it's $500,000. Oh my gosh. It used to take me 4 to 6 months to get through health department. Now it takes me a year. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So that has been the issue. Once they're open, sales are decent, costs are difficult, but good operators have managed through them. And by the way, only good operators are left after COVID. If you weren't a good operator, you didn't make it through. So that has been a challenge, but a surmountable one. The challenge that's been really difficult is the cost of construction as it relates to TIs and getting through health department, honestly.
And as a landlord, while all of this is going on, you are sitting with empty space with no rent.
Exactly. And I think we're better positioned to it. Luckily we're not the coupon clipper, mailbox money landlord where it's okay, rent goes up, sign the lease, whatever. We eat our own cooking. So we understand these things. We try to get ahead of them. We're engaged with the city. We're trying to get creative about how we orient these deals, and we want our tenants to be successful. We eat our own cooking. We're tenants within our centers as neighbors to our tenants, and we're also the landlord, and we don't sell. So if our tenant fails 2-3 years from now, we eat that. We're not going to, sign a high lease. They're going to kill it for 6 months. Free rent burns off and they're out, and we'll flip the property. We live with it.
Yeah, and I think that really is true for any long-term property owner in any segment, which is you want your tenants to do well. The better they do, the better off you are. And if nothing else, the more stable your property is.
Exactly.
So I think that gets back to this whole, stability of the economy and where is it going, and no one has a crystal ball. I guess the other question I would ask you is, between now and the end of the year, retail has been all over the board, and you do have to break it down between specialty and restaurants and then just straight up retail. But in general, where do you see the real estate market segment? I mean, for a while it was, hey, malls are dead. Nobody goes out to retail during COVID. Everybody's dying. I got picnic tables out in the parking lot. It's not the case so much anymore, but still has its upside, but also its challenges.
Yeah, I think where we see the larger trends is we have been in this big F&B push the last 5 or 10 years. Packing House, as an example, is going to be 10 years old this year. That was one of the first food halls in Southern California, and it's one of the last ones standing, to be honest with you, because they're tough assets to operate. I think now we're moving, and that it went from retail to F&B. I think now we're in a transition to services. I think when you think about your haircut place, your nail place, there's a whole new generation of entrepreneurs bringing a refreshed mix to that. And where I see us going longer term is more service oriented. I think the regular inline retailers, we always joke, we haven't done a dress shop deal in 10 years. And we used to think that we have another one of our MOs is size is the enemy of cool. And our biggest space in our portfolio is 12,000 square feet, which is not that big, particularly when you compare it to a traditional mall. But I'll tell you now, 12,000 square feet is obsolescent.
Yeah.
There are no 12,000 square foot retailers. I mean, Neighborhood Goods maybe was one of the new exciting ones. They're out of business.
You've got to do a lot of volume to cover that monthly nut.
So where do I see the retail market going? I think we're going to shift a little bit towards services, given the difficulty of F&B to get up and running. Once it's running, it's been pretty strong. Again, we're fortunate to be in an Orange County market where household incomes, median incomes are 40% higher than average. You have great balance sheets, well educated, so we're a little bit more insulated from the day-to-day economic hits of the general economy. But I see us, getting a little bit smaller. I think leases are going to get a little bit shorter. We've always been at the forefront of that, and we're going to get a little bit more service oriented. But I think,
what do you see about the rest of the retail segment? I mean, do you see the neighborhood center still do? I mean, you see a lot of these regional malls getting redeveloped or alternative uses, apartments and other things. I think we're going to see more of that. Yeah,
I agree. How much of it will be successful, I don't know, and on what time frame, I don't know. I think those are the two caveats. I think again, we're very Orange County focused. When I look at big regional malls on big swaths of land, that land is economically viable for something. But how long, I mean, you know probably as well as anyone how long it takes to get stuff approved, and it's a rezone, and it's all the neighbors complaining, it's the loss of sales tax dollars. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it's, although it may seem obvious from a 30,000 foot view, I think that will take a little bit longer to come to fruition than many people think.
And what do you think is one of the bigger factors that you're watching closely, at least over the next 6 to 12 months? Is it inflation? Is it interest rates? Is it the economy? Is it the election? Is it all the above?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above. If there's anything that keeps me up at night, I actually look at LOI velocity. Because no matter where the interest rates are, no matter where sales are, and by the way, sales are not a great indicator now with expenses, because
your profits are shrunk.
Exactly. Your top line could be up 20, 30%. That doesn't tell me anything. Your bottom line could be cut in half, depending on your expense ratios. So what I'm concerned about is LOIs. When we continue to get LOIs from these really hungry, passionate entrepreneurs, that is the lifeblood of our business. If there's not new people starting businesses, expanding businesses in these, again, first, second, third, fifth location, lab, little American business, when we get a decline in those, that's what keeps me up at night. As long as they have the perseverance to work through all of these issues, we're going to be there for them. We're going to keep growing. We're going to do well. When that spigot shuts off, if it does or slows, that's what would keep me up at night.
Yeah, interesting. Well, look, I told you we'd go quick when we started, and it does. We could chew the fat all day, so to speak. But I do appreciate you coming in and sharing your thoughts and your insights with us. If people want to find out more about the company and the projects that you have, where's the website that they can go to?
Yeah, you can go to labholding.com. Feel free to email me, Sebastion at the lab. You probably know our assets: lab, camp, packing house.
Or look for you sitting outside and having a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah, if you see me on the beach, then feel free to come talk to me, because it means things are going good.
But, well, good. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and your insight, and much continued success for you and your family and the business.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming on the show. I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company. It has been a Tuesday. It will be that way all day today. We will be back here again next week, talking more real estate. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next week.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.